other people here to discuss with us. We're very happy to see you here. We have Anton Kuchukidze, who is a representative from the opposition bloc. This party was created on the base of the Party of Region, former party of the President Yanukovych. Now is one of the representatives of the opposition in the parliament. Also we have Victoria Wojcicka, who is a representative of the Samopomich, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, a new party also in the coalition, and is an expert on the energy. She came from the business, from the private sector, and as well Olga Delyakova, who also came from the business, from the private sector, but to the previous parliament, a member of parliament from Udar party, a party of Vitaly Klitschko, which is currently in a bloc of the Petro Poroshenko, Ukrainian president.
So we wanted to start off with a general question. It was, unprecedented that you have three people of foreign origin in the new cabinet that received Ukrainian citizenship via a special order from President Poroshenko, who was recently given the ability to grant that. As a foreigner myself, it may seem that I'm biased with that, but I'm not. We're just sort of curious, there was talk about that, about maybe there aren't Ukrainians who can do that job. Some people were even offended that foreigners were brought in to do this. So what are your takes on that? Maybe we could start with you, Victoria.
Well, we've seen the opportunity of offering or considering foreigners to become part of the new cabinet of ministers to be one of the solutions to form cabinet of ministers of professionals, people with a strong background, people who won't be linked or connected with the political parties, people who will be dedicated to reforms and who won't, look behind their shoulders and be curious and worried about the ratings of their political parties. Well, so we do appreciate that the president himself has offered this opportunity to particular individuals, valuing their already achievements that they have already shown in Ukraine, because Natalia Yurevsko, she worked here for over 20 years with the minister. The other ministers, they also have background in Ukraine.
It's been called a technocratic government, and that's how they're presenting
yes,
it.
Exactly.
There was a Western headhunting firm that was supposed to identify some of the people who were qualified, and what you're saying is, in the positive regard, that these are people who weren't involved in politics, who, based on that, are supposed to have been chosen based on their technical
We believe
skills.
it's a very strong sign, and it's a positive sign for Ukraine, and it's a right beginning to really make sure that the reforms, and it will be radical reforms, they do actually happen, and they happen fast and soon.
And Olga, what was your take on that? Were you an enthusiastic voter for this cabinet altogether?
Well, I'd say the first day I heard about those news, I was rather skeptical. Until the point I discovered the names. And I think here it doesn't really matter that they are foreigners. What matters is that those people, they have specific experience of restructuring, changing, and crisis management. And this is what I value in them. I also value that those are very accomplished, very mature professionals, who will not hesitate to say no, be it to Prime Minister or be it Rada. And this is what we need right now. If it was business as usual, I'd say that's a bit strange decision. We have a lot of Ukrainians with Western background, with education from abroad, with experience from abroad, and we can handle our own issues just as we did on Maidan. But right now, we need very innovative solutions of people who can interpret what is happening in Ukraine, get support from be it IMF, World Bank, or any other partners.
Well, that's the more positive take, that these people can present a positive face abroad into secure loans.
Not only, but they will bring different set of practices. This is my hope, and they will not hesitate to do reforms which are so much needed right now.
And Anton, you are not a member of parliament, but your party, they didn't vote, they stepped out, and what is your take on that?
For us, the question concerning the foreigners in the Cabinet of Ministers is very controversial because we think that Ukraine has a lot of professionals. The second point why the party was against such appointments because this position was not declared by parties during the election campaign. So we take such action as such which can be honest with the voters. And the third position is that we had great crisis manager as Pavlo Sheremetyev in the former cabinet, and I just want to remind you his explanation of his resignation, that he couldn't fight against the system, and we think that this decision will not lead to the positive changes.
Well, one may look at Pavlo Sheremetev's experience as a negative one. I still think it was a very positive sign for Ukrainian society that, the change, the government is ready to bring the change. I wish he stayed longer. I wish he had more people like-minded on board. I wish circumstances were different. Right now, I think we need to focus on future, and we need to do everything possible to help this government, which is a dream team.
And there is one more, thing to add to this. The circumstances are indeed different because when we spoke with the candidates, we asked them in particular whether they will bring team with them, because we know if we look at all sorts of ministers and governmental authorities, you will see that they're all people, the system itself is protected by people. And it's not just one person who is required to make a change, but it requires like a team, warriors who will come and actually do their job. So we need to change the system from top to down, and I hope, and I do have a great hope, that these people, this new cabinet of ministers, will achieve that.
Can I talk one fact?
Sure, and then we'll ask for the
I agree with my colleagues that Ukraine needs changes, and the changes shall start from ourselves and from the first plenary session of the new Verkhovna Rada. If you look at the procedure rules of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Article 16, about the obligatory list which the Verkhovna Rada is obliged to discuss with members of parliament, you will not find the issue on the appointment of new cabinet ministers. So if we talk about changes, we must start from ourselves, and we shall respect the rules of procedure. And I can say that this decision was adopted without taking into consideration the Article 16 of the Rules of Procedure of the Verkhovna Rada.
Did your party bring this issue with voting and with the procedure? The opposition bloc this time just left. Not voting. Is the party, starting from this moment, is going to not be present in the parliament? Or is there any issues the party is ready to cooperate if it's good for the country?
It was a sign of our protest with that fact that we, not I am, but the members of parliament had not a chance to discuss with the cabinet future ministers their programs. And the opposition bloc declares that it is a good European practice when the future candidates for ministers discuss their programs on the committees of the Verkhovna Rada.
It's a lot about timing, and actually we encourage our audience to be engaged, following our Twitter, using the hashtag Hromadske, and we already get a response. So we can also, you can see that there are these tweets from the German business community, and it says, German business community is supportive of radical change in Ukraine, public administration, justice system, but government must act very quickly. And this general concern. But what is a timetable? What is the real date? Because quick, it can be also very general. What will
Well, I think we are all in anticipation of the major law of the next few weeks, which is budget law for 2015, which will set up the ground for reforms in the next year. And looking at the leaks in the press, many people will not be happy about the cuts in the social programs, in state expenditures. But I'd say the most radical reform we need right away, both, I think we will agree because we are working on the same committee on energy, gas and oil, the energy market, gas reform, and anything to do with our energy dependence on Russia and state deficit. This is exactly what we need to start with.
Olga brought the issue of energy, and there is a lot of criticism in some way to the current Minister of Energy because he was a member of this, rightly saying, Energy Regulation and Risk Commission, and there is a responsibility for, there is this crisis now with the coal, with subsidies, with energy lack, which could be, maybe if it would be sorted out earlier, things will get better.
I mean, the issues like we're talking about Volodymyr Demchyshin, for not everyone who knows. The foreigners, I think, for at least for the foreign media, maybe unsurprisingly, were a very bright moment in the coalition. People with international experience who came in, who spoke English fluently. And the Minister of Energy, that was seen as a weakness. Many people in the energy sector said they didn't know who he was. And then, of course, there was the issue this week where Prime Minister Yatsenyuk had said there had been a nuclear accident, which turned out not to be a nuclear accident, but put him in a very difficult situation. What's your evaluation of him as minister? Are you familiar with him at all from your work in the
I know him from the previous activities with investment community, but I'd say, energy, gas and oil industry in this country is one of the most corrupted industries. So maybe it's good that nobody knows him. Maybe it's good that he is not so well connected to the elites in this industry. And I'd say, the problem of Naftogaz has been here for 20 years. We are talking about big numbers. So anybody who was here for just 2 or 3 months, I don't think we can blame him for anything which is happening right now. We are at war. We have a real drastic situation in the east with the coal. We have, energy issue at the Zaporizhia station, which was not definitely a fault of 1 or 2 people. It's just an accident. So, but I think right now the good point about this government is that they are, like business people, will be able to look at the numbers and finally make this very tough decision of removing subsidies to all for no good reason.
And this is something you mentioned, because one of the things we try and do is explain Ukraine a bit better to our foreign audience. So when we talk about corruption in the energy sector, much of the energy is subsidized, especially for private consumers. But the issue is it's not always clear whether or not energy is going to private consumers and when it's going to a business, and then there are many subcontractors. So part of what Ukraine is trying to do is cut those subsidies, because that's a monthly, foreign currency amount that Ukraine puts out at a time when currency is very, very well strapped. And Victoria, are there concrete reforms you'd want to see done with Naftogaz, or what are your priorities in the energy sector for the coming months?
The priorities are already indicated in the coalition agreement, as we were working on it together with Olga and other representatives of the coalition. I have to admit that the initial draft of the coalition agreement was quite straightforward, and we had to find certain compromises with other political parties to make sure that the wording is accepted by all 5 parties, by all 5 forces, as the coalition agreement is based on the consensus.
So is Samopomych happy with the wording?
The wording is weaker than it was initially, and we will do everything that is in our power. And I have to also come back to the comments about the Minister of Energy. We, as the fraction, as the party, interviewed this person, and during the interview, I have to admit that, at least what I can say, that my judgments are based on the words that were communicated. This person is dedicated to radical reforms that will eliminate this subsidies issue, and we will touch base on that. I will try to explain that very shortly, very briefly. He wants to reform Naftogaz. He wants to make it completely independent. He wants to break it into different specific independent parts of the business according to the EU legislation law that governs the energy sector, because we now have one big entity, like enemy, that has the production, transportation, and the distribution under one umbrella. So that our foreigners and people who are watching us understand, current payment, the bill that Naftogaz is paying for the gas is around from $500 million to $1 billion. So every month we have to sign a check, we as a country, to finance Naftogaz so it can go and pay for the gas that we import from Russia.
Which is a tremendous amount of money.
It's tremendous. We have a very strong pressure on all our foreign currency reserves. And we also have a great pressure from our international partners, from IMF in particular, who are trying to convey the message that, guys, you have to stop this practice of cross-subsidizing the difference in the price, $340 and above the import price for the gas that we buy from Russia, and the gas that we produce here and we sell locally, which is $20-something per 1,000 cubic meters. Everything that is on top of $23 is subsidized from the state budget. And we see the numbers of the consumption. It used to be 70 billion cubic meters, then it dropped to 50 billion cubic meters, then we dropped it to 40, and now we have, under the issue of the Cabinet of Ministers just a couple of months ago, we had to cut our consumptions to a level like 36, 37 billion cubic meters. But for some reason, we're not consuming much less. So if we look at the numbers, we understand that that was like we were using the norms of allocating the gas, the consuming to the consumers under the old Soviet scheme, which is completely, it's ridiculous. Like if you had 2 people in an apartment, you would consume X amount of gas, and then if you had 6 people in the apartment, you would consume 3 times more gas. But this is not the case.
Well, and it's trying to merge, an old system, the way people are used to dealing with things, to the international system, and that's done. And part of what we try and do here is do a lot with explaining explainers. So we want to draw attention to one of our explainers now, which is just on Ukraine's new government, looking at the new ministers and all the people we have there, so you can follow at home and see our articles on Medium. I did also want to bring attention to one tweet that we had. I'll get back to that. I believe that was Hetman Andrei we had. Because as we asked you, we sent out to our followers on Twitter how much time they gave the new government to have real concrete results to achieve. And he gave it 12 months, so a similar number to what you had and suggested, which is a good one. But the question, my big question, maybe Natalie has a different one, is do you think the coalition can really hold together over that time and do all of that? Because as you've mentioned, especially raising energy prices, that's something people aren't going to be happy about.
Well, the first test will be the budget, 2015 budget, that's for sure. And this is when we will see whether the coalition will pass the test of unity.
And I think it is a very special job for this government to communicate this change very efficiently, not only with MPs, but also with the people. You will be surprised, but some people are way more mature than we think about them, and they are way more readier than we expect them to be for these changes. I was just talking to my mom yesterday, and she said to me, you know what, I do understand that in a country which is facing actual war, we have to save. And I do understand that maybe I will not be able to travel by public transportation so often as I was traveling before. But the problem here is not only energy sector. We do have to, make an order in all those social programs, in our public expenditures for education, for medicine. We need to make it personalized, not just, a black hole on our budget.
Maybe, and also Anton will jump into that, but I have a bit different question. While traveling and being in the East, in the area which is under the separatist control, you see a horrible situation, which is a close to humanitarian disaster, when many people for months hasn't received any pension. pension, and it's already an issue that they can buy basic things. And the issue with the IDPs, it's still a lot of money. So how are you gonna, like at the same time say that it's very important for the country to cut, but at the same time a huge amount of millions of the people in this country are really on the edge and need support from the government because they don't have any other.
Yeah, well, the keeping the balance between supporting those who need it and removing all the perks and privileges from those who are way beyond living standards. They have enough of, that's why government right now is talking about special pensions, and this is one of the IMF requests, special perks, including to MPs and to judges and to prosecutors and to other, levels of high-level officials. But I totally agree with you that those who are under very difficult circumstances, they have to get pensions, they have to get support in terms of medical support, they have to get everything which will keep them surviving through this hard time.
So we have a question we want to ask each of you, and we'll start with Anton. What are the top 3 reforms that you would want to see from this government? Or what do you think the top 3 reforms are that Ukraine needs at this point in time?
I think that reform is a long-standing process, and it is a very difficult process. My colleagues talk a lot about the reform of energy sector, but I just want to remind one of the message from the IMF, which we can find in the memorandum between the government of Ukraine and International Monetary Fund that our government is obliged to create program for support so-called low-income people. It means the appropriate energy the appropriate energy program for them. We didn't see it from the Mr. Yatsenyuk, so I just want to say that we don't need to talk a lot about future, but let's talk about such obligations which our government have. And if you are interested in my mind about the reforms, I think if our colleagues take the experience of Georgia, you can find one interesting fact that Mr. Saakashvili started his reform from the judiciary system. If we look our foreigners in current cabinet of ministers, it is the position of Ministry of Economy, it is the position of Ministry of Finance, and
so you're saying the judiciary needs to be more focused?
So,
yes.
Having this time also, what are your priorities, if to just name them, being very concrete?
Once again, energy reform, which means restructuring Naftogaz, situation and introducing market prices for people, along with a clear and very specific system of subsidies for the poor and those who need support from the state. Also, right now, our banking and financial system, financial institutions are not in a very healthy position. Just in the fall, we did stress test, and NBU ran stress test with 15 major banks, and only 5 of them were up to the levels. So the government and NBU will be facing very difficult dilemma of whether to spend remains of the reserves or whether to let some of the banks leave the market. And finally, we actually need to set up the ground for business to regain the trust with the government. I expect this budget to be, budget law to be very tough, but I do hope that the government will not only increase taxes on business and people and cover the
What has to be
deficit
about
by increase
stimulation
of the
and
taxes.
encouraging the climate? And Victoria, what would your top reforms?
1, 2, 3.
If we can get this.
How much time do we have? Well, energy reform was mentioned. Judicial reform, we need to bring back the trust in our judicial system, and it relates to both people here who live in Ukraine, but also it relates to the foreigners and the investors that do want to come to the country where their interests, their investments will be protected. And illustration together with the fight with the corruption, that's also one of major concerns of ours, the top priorities. And the third one is the decentralization. We want to bring the power, the budgets closer to communities, and together with the responsibilities for managing those.
A lot of ambition, new government, new parliament, but the same old practice of fighting in the parliament. That's what an international audience also have seen this week. And as a member of the new parliament, of the revolution of dignity, how do you feel about that? What are you going to do? Is it all the same practice when people are fighting? Is
Well,
the parliament a place for that?
I'd say I regret seeing it. I do hope that that was just a, kind of a emotional start of the parliament. That last week was very long week because we basically spent it waiting and waiting, discussing, consulting, and not voting. So I only hope that starting from next week, we will be very serious about considering drafts of the laws, discussing ideas of how to get our country out of crisis, and less fighting.
I mean, it's interesting because the fights have been there for a while. There have been articles written, especially in foreign media, for a long time. It's dynamic, it's on television. This was slightly different because it was Parysyuk, who's from Maidan, who's always been very impassioned, and he was concerned that the values of Maidan weren't being respected. But I guess one of the points that I'm curious about is how can these sort of conflicts be resolved? Because in that particular incident, it was Parysyuk who theoretically is pro-Europe, pro all these reforms, but came to heads with Groisman, the speaker.
He didn't get in heads with Groisman. He had his personal position, and it related to the way the process of voting for the distributions of committees was done. But he was provoked. He was provoked by one of his colleagues from Bloc Poroshenko, and I think in order to avoid such situations, all we need to do is to be patient. Don't provoke each other. I mean, we have to be respectful to each other, and we have to be really careful about the things that we're saying in the parliament, because we're being considered like people looking at us as at the mirror, and they're basically, especially in the outside world, we're being perceived by the picture they see when they look at the parliament. So we have to be very careful when we...
And how do you do that? Because you must have some experience with that as well. You're a member of the party Volya, correct? Which
Correct.
split after it came into the parliament, and that
Yes.
was a big issue of controversy because it was the first, new party that arrived, and fresh faces, all of that. And then it split, and that was frustrating for
And it
some
was very
people.
peaceful. I hope you followed the news. It was
There are
completely
no fights that I heard.
No fights, very peaceful. We've admitted that unfortunately we've lost control over the party, and this is what happened. We couldn't stay with people who unfortunately took control not in the nice way, so to say, and I think it comes from the inner soul, and it comes from the respect that comes from within people, and if we do respect ourselves, we will respect our colleagues as well.
But can you have those conflicts and still work with people in parliament? I mean,
We
that's
have to
Absolutely.
work. We have to work. That's the only way we actually can move on and implement reforms and really bring our country to a completely different way.
Our show is interactive, so the Twitter user @Raxaro asks, how are you going to recruit professionals who will need to replace current corrupt bureaucrats to achieve any reform progress?
Well, it's a question, it's a very good question, and there are already indicated and communicated ways how to do that. First of all, we're planning, and we hope to see it in the budget that will be presented, considerable cuts in the number of state employees, which means that we will have freed amount of funds that we can use for a smaller number of people, and we will be able then to attract professionals by actually implementing the process of open selections like it's done in private sector. You have a job opening, you have a screening, you have a period for application, and etc. So it can be done, and there is an issue with finances, and this issue is then solved by cutting the number of people.
Last but pretty controversial topic, the topic of this week is this creation of the Ministry of Information, which is already called the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Propaganda. You voted for this cabinet. You didn't have you voted?
I withdrew from,
You withdrew.
yes.
Have you voted?
Well, I just didn't vote by occasion because I was kind of misled by the situation in the room. I was not happy about the procedure of voting for this particular ministry. However, I am about to publish tomorrow my new blog post on what is my vision for what this ministry is supposed to do.
So there is one of our users, Serhi SK, says, Truth Ministry is good in the time of war if it can create efficient counter-propaganda, international TV channels similar to RT. This is very different to what the media community here says, and there were protests. We'll see that later, but that is really considered. With the whole, we will have a discussion right after that with the media lawyers, why it contradicts a lot of principles of this country. So what is your take on that? So are you in favor?
I'm not in favor of Ministry of Propaganda and Ministry of Truth because I actually think people are smart enough to make their own judgment of whether some facts are true or not. But I do miss right now, once again, I was studying how reforms were done in the other countries. And in many cases, 90% of the reforms which were not successful, those reforms were not communicated in a proper way to the people in the country. So I do not believe that Ministry of Information and Truth should be targeting people who don't believe us, who don't want to hear what we have to offer. But I do believe that Ukrainians, regular Ukrainians, are hungry right now to know what is going to happen in their future. So if I may, I would advise this minister to be focused on delivering messages from the current government on which reforms and how exactly will be done in the next months.
Generally, consider that the press secretaries and the press offices of the particular minister can do that job or any coordination. And the issue was also to explain with the way this ministry was introduced. A lot of people didn't know about that even a couple of days before. It's a new ministry in a budget. So
we've learned about it a couple of hours before the voting. So it wasn't even worse, not just a couple of days. It was like a night before the voting. I withdrew from the voting, and actually I had
because of that issue,
not just because of that, not because of the procedural issue. I also truly believe that we don't need this ministry, and I believe that we need to, if there is an issue, we need to split it and analyze it. What is the issue? Is the issue that we lack the communication with the outside world? Okay, there is one particular function of our ambassadors and our missions abroad that they have to communicate what is happening in Ukraine, and they have to work really with the international communities. If they cannot do that, let's replace them with people who can do that. Our Hanna Hopko, member of our party, she has been elected as the head of the Committee on Foreign Relations, and her mission, as she sees it, is to present Ukraine internationally in the way that has to explain what is really happening, what is planning, what are the plans of the cabinet of ministers of the government, all other political parties. So we have very strong foundation for international communication with international world, which is our embassies and our missions.
That there are other channels.
There are other channels. Well, we need to make sure that they then are not silent. If we look at here locally, then again, what is the question? What is the issue? Do we need access to TV channels, or do we want to create additional one, or we want to use, as you said, the press attaché of all the ministers?
The people that there was a question: is creating Ministry of Truth dangerous for Ukraine democracy in a time of war? So the answer from was that literally the worst democracy and participation, the only thing that can save the country, otherwise just promises, not reforms. That was made by the Liberty user. And Anton, we're wrapping up.
Can I add some words? According to the words of our political opponents, we see that they have not final explanation of this ministry, and I want to pay your attention on that fact that the coalition refused from the creating the real problem committee as a committee on the questions of Crimea and Donbass, and this committee will not have such unclear explanation. It is a real problem for Ukraine, but to give a post for minister to the ministry which is not in fact, it is I think unclear for everybody in Ukraine.
Your party in the previous parliament was the one which voted for the laws which used to be called the dictatorship law, and a lot on the laws which suppress the press freedom. On this case, I mean, we can expect the Ministry of Truth under Yanukovych very well. So do you think, besides the reason there can be a different committee, what do you think about the Ministry of the Communication as is the proper name of it?
I can answer that who voted on these laws of the 16th of January, they regretted, and they said about their mistake, and the members of parliament wish our colleagues will not make such mistake again. It was a technical mistake of many, so we only wish to our colleagues.
So we'll follow more on that. Thanks a lot for participation. We
Thank
had
you.
representatives from the members of parliament from the Poroshenko bloc, from Samopomich party, and a representative of opposition bloc.
So now we have an exclusive interview for you with Kenneth Roth, the Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, addressing some of these issues from the new parliament and looking at the situation in Ukraine.
I would like to start with the latest news about the creation of the Ministry of Information in Ukraine. Do you think it is a threat to human rights, to the right to freedom of speech?
Well, it could be. I think we have to see how it plays out. I understand the government is setting it up because it wants to counter Russian propaganda. But I think we all know that the best way to fight propaganda is not with more propaganda, it's with honesty. And so I hope that the government recognizes that it should be opening up the East. It should be welcoming journalists to go there to write about what's actually happening. Because the more the government tries to cover up, the more it's going to have a hard time distinguishing itself from the Russia propaganda that everybody has learned to distrust. So we're going to have to look very carefully, are there restrictions put on journalists? For a moment there were, then they were taken away. I hope that the government has learned from that little debacle to not try to restrict journalists, but rather to try to facilitate their access to whatever can be found in the East.
What are your other concerns in the field of human rights in Ukraine? What were you talking about with Ukrainian officials?
Well, Human Rights Watch, in any armed conflict situation, always reports on both sides. And so over the last several months, we've actually put out 23 different publications about abuses by the separatists, by the rebels. We also put out a major report on the Russian occupation of Crimea and the abuses that the Crimean Tatars are facing, or people who don't want to adopt Russian citizenship. But at the same time, we've been looking at the behavior of the pro-government forces, and that's been a major topic of our conversations here in Kyiv with government officials from a range of different ministries. What we're most concerned about is that pro-government forces have been using certain indiscriminate weapons, grad rockets, cluster munitions, in populated areas. Now, the good news is the government agrees with us that that should never happen, that these kind of indiscriminate weapons violate the Geneva Conventions when used in populated areas. So the real question is, how does that message get to the troops on the ground? Because they haven't heard it yet, according to the research of Human Rights Watch done in the East, looking at the physical evidence of the use of these weapons. And so we've been pushing the government to be much more specific about the instructions that it gives its troops. Not simply to say, respect the Geneva Conventions, which sounds great but doesn't mean anything to the troops on the ground. Rather, we want them to be quite explicit. Never use grad rockets, never use cluster munitions in populated areas, even if the other side is shooting at you. Because what we find often is that the rebels are firing from the cities. They, in themselves, are violating the Geneva Conventions because they are endangering the civilian population, possibly even using them as human shields. But we all know that under the Geneva Conventions, a violation by one side never justifies a violation by the other side. And so we have to get that message clearly conveyed to the troops on the ground. Similarly, the fact that one side may be an aggressor doesn't allow the other side to ignore the Geneva Conventions. The fact that Russia is backing the rebels in the East doesn't allow pro-Ukrainian forces to simply ignore the basic rules designed to spare civilians as much as possible.
So for this discussion on the Ministry of Information, Communication, whatsoever, we have Igor Roskladai, who is a lawyer from Media Law Institution and also is a member of a media community who is, I may say, outrage of this decision. I mean, a lot of journalists are. And Stefan got famous actually with his Facebook post, which was spread all around. I would confirm, even between the government institution, everybody who follows the work of the foreign journalists, that you said that Ukrainians get as stupid as the Russians in what they do here with information.
So what are they doing here? I mean, what is this Ministry of Information? Because we haven't seen a text yet, we haven't seen a real description of what it is, but there's some understandings that, you know, Ukraine has suffered, Ukraine hasn't been able to get its message out as well through its state institutions, that many of the people in its embassies and abroad aren't very good at communicating to a foreign audience what's about. So what does this look like, and why is it so potentially dangerous?
I think the foreign journalists have been really surprised by two facts: the creation of this ministry and also this regulation to travels from journalists, both Ukrainian and international journalists, to the ATO zone without any military escort. And my opinion, but I think it's also the opinion of lots of foreign journalists, is that Ukraine cannot win this information war against Russia. We have a state called the Russian Federation with an amount of state resources which you cannot compare with the Ukrainian one, and Russia uses media as a weapon with this war, with its own televisions, with international televisions like RT. And the metaphor that I wanted to use is, for example, if I wanted to defy one of the Klitschko brothers on a ring of boxing, and I trained during 1 month, after 1 month of musculation, I will not beat Klitschko. I mean, it will smash my face. And this is a little bit the comparison that I'd like to make. It's not in the interest of Ukraine right now to limit the access to information. I think it will be more strategic to open access to information.
But to a certain extent, it's understandable, correct? Because Russia has increased its financing of media outlets abroad. They've opened, I think, a Russian Today equivalent in France. And is the since you are a correspondent for Le Figaro, is that message getting across? Does Russia's message get across better in France, for example, or other countries?
I can fully understand that Ukraine wants to build up some state media, some some public broadcasters. But at the same time, the message that we receive from the creation of this new ministry is that there is a mix between the spheres of politics and information. And Juristats, the new appointed minister, talked in the past days about politic information, and I think Ukraine should definitively split those two parts.
We want to that Juristats, who is a newly appointed Minister of Information, which still we don't have a proper documents and legal base for this ministry to function, but we have his short interview, so we'll hear from him.
У нас є багато регуляторів або дорадчих органів, типу, наприклад, РНБО, але функціонально це дорадчий орган президента. У нас немає жодного органу, який займається інформаційною політикою, оскільки у нас навіть немає інформаційної стратегії. Ні безпеки, ні стратегії інформаційної політики, на жаль.
Стратегії немає, міністерство є. Чим воно буде займатися?
Розроблена стратегія, яка є, наприклад, вона має бути впроваджена якимось інституційним органом. Питання в тому, яким чином. Я думаю, що після публічного обговорення і діалогу в коаліції буде зрозуміло, яким чином це можна зробити.
А конкретно по пунктах можна сказати, перше, друге, третє, це міністерство там заборонить російські канали, введе порядок акредитації. От що конкретно, які задачі?
Перше, розгляд публічний стратегії інформаційної політики, погодження зі всіма, хто може бути в цьому корисним і допомогти впровадженню її. Друге, в концепції, яка закладена.
So you can watch all our videos, all the interviews on all the issues on our YouTube channel, also following our Twitter, and then you have a full version of the reports, but going on the discussion.
So Ihor, you had mentioned that you met with Stets earlier in the week. What do you make of his take on it? What is his vision for this ministry, and what are the issues there?
The main problem with Stets is that he don't prepare some presentation for public. He became, we create ministry, but for what purposes, it's quite difficult to understand even we met with him. Because as I understand from him, he wants this ministry to have some possibilities to do something on ATO zone. It's the main purpose. Another topic, it's foreign broadcasting. It's something like Voice of America or Deutsche Welle or something like that. This is two main points I found from his long speech. But in the same, when we read this document, and we saw a lot of statements which connected to National TV and Radio Council, State TV and Radio Committee, and so on. So this some duplicating of power, of different powers.
Well, it's an overlap which creates conflicts. It's redundant. There are ministries there that have some say.
Besides that, I'll encourage everybody also to read our explainer on Ministry of Information, where you have also the commands and the position and the reasons and how the community reacted also with all these memes, which are there.
It was very Ukrainian. It was part of it was responding to it with humor. That they.
No, this problem of this ministry is that as always, it's not first time. First of all, we had this ministry. We had this ministry twice. It was after the constitution adopted in 1996, and then in 2000, beginning of 2000. And it was created and deleted. It's some movement, but for what purposes, it's quite difficult to understand.
Besides that, it goes maybe against some principles. The other issue is that Juristats is very close to one of the leaders and the person who runs the fifth channel, the channel which was owned by Poroshenko, was a legendary channel during the Orange Revolution, is a close friend of the president, is his daughter, her godmother is a president wife, and you know, there are MPs like Tatiana Chornovol or Sergei Leshchenko, and they say that this ministry is created just for this guy who is a president friend.
It looks like. So really, if you see in general overview, if you see this that states have some relation with Poroshenko, yeah, it looks like that he creates this for this guy. For what he explained to us is that he works in National Guardia and he do something and he need more power because he told us that he have possibilities to open some doors in cabinet of ministers or in parliament and other state bodies. But it's his description that he was to make it more legally, more like ministry and ministry. He want to talk with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is really big problem for Ukraine because they do nothing. It is my opinion that we lost a lot of conflicts because Ministry of Foreign Affairs and embassies was silent. When this guy in this story about this boy or story about some women and so on, and we have no reaction in those days even.
We can also see that the audience can follow these memes, which are about also the Ministry of Magic, which...
So this is a great one. This is one of my favorites from the week, because the idea was that, you know, like the Ministry of Information, you can create a new ministry out of nowhere, and then they can magically make all your problems go away. So if you have a Ministry of Information, suddenly all the information...
Ministry of Belief, Ministry of something like that. But you know, the main problem is that, in fact, we have two opinions on this ministry. One of them, could not be present at all. Another one, and I see it from normal people, that yes, we need some ministry to do something with Russian TV, to do something.
To confront it, that there's a response.
It's like public, it's a request from normal people that we have conflict with Russia, but we see Russian movies on intercity buses, we see Russian movies on the channels and so on and so on, and we need something like counter-propaganda.
They had banned some Russian channels, television and radio earlier in the year, so it does seem to be building on that. Stefan, did you have a comment that you wanted to say?
Yes, I know that there is this debate inside the journalist community in Ukraine. Some journalists think that now Ukraine is in a state of war and you have to abandon some journalistic positions to wage an information war. And some other journalists want to keep doing independent journalism because it would be better for the country at least. And I have my also foreign position in this. One of the main issues is now the control of information coming from the eastern part of Ukraine. And what is really concerning is that the new ministry used to be responsible for the press service of the National Guard. And there is a mix of military affairs and information, and for me it's very, very dangerous because there is a risk.
The risk is there, absolutely, but what I always feel in Ukraine that the laws are not working. So, for instance, the Ministry of Defense can issue some order and nobody cares. So do you have any did you have some difficulties in working with the Ukrainian government or Ukrainian military when they were suppressing and, stopping you from getting information?
No, because when I was working in the ATO zone, for example, in the past month, we didn't have this accreditation, this paper accreditation that the separatists gave us, which was very helpful sometimes to work. So we had quite an easy access, but at the same time, militaries on the checkpoints, for example, didn't know about those regulations about journalists, and some of them were quite annoying. What is more concerning for me now is that if a ministry decides to rule how journalists, Ukrainians and foreigners, will go inside the ATO zone, there is a risk that Eastern Ukraine becomes a black hole of information, because now the interest of Western media is slightly decreasing after 1 year of Maidan, Crimea, war in eastern
What
Ukraine.
you're referring to is that there is this new regulation announced by, I believe it was the Ministry of Defense or the Armed Forces of Ukraine, saying that in the future, journalists, both Ukrainian and foreigners, would have to be escorted to go to the ATO, both Ukrainian and other sides, be approved, be registered. And essentially what they seem to want were guided tours where you would only see what they were showing, which...
So this regulation has been cancelled, has been revoked, obviously, but the fact that this ministry still exists makes there is a pressure for the coming month.
Do you could I ask, do you need this accreditation in ATO zone or not?
No, actually not. Now the journalists who are working in the ATO zone have to call or send an email to the SBU, and then they are
State security
service, and then they are put on a list. And if we get controlled by military forces, by Ukrainian military forces, we have to say them that we are accredited in Kiev, but we have no paper for this.
It's like notification.
Igor, the last question on this. I know exactly at this moment there are a lot of people from the media community gathering in order to do something with that. So will it exist or not? Because for us it looks like a bit still a question. Some regulations were revoked, but do you believe it will?
As ministry?
Yeah.
I think it could be. It could be, but at the same time, with which power? And it's our work to, if it will stay, that they have very limited power with very limited, for example, just communication with MFA, with maybe ATO, but not licensing of print press, not licensing of state media, no internet media, not. This not to repeat the laws on January 16th at least. But I think it rather will stay.
Okay, so follow more on that, and thanks a lot for joining us in this discussion. And this week there were people, activists, journalists protesting in front of the Ukrainian parliament. How it was, that you'll see what is a general mood, at least in the capital, regarding that.
Сьогодні буде намагання створити Міністерство інформації, на яке претендують юристи з депутатів блоку Порошенка. На мою думку і на думку журналістів, які сьогодні прийшли, це неприйнятно, оскільки несе ризики створення цензури в Україні, нового органу, який буде регулювати інформаційну сферу та який може призвести до того, що в нас буде запроваджена цензура, втім, в той чи інший спосіб. Але обурює не лише створення цього органу, але й те, в який спосіб це робиться. Тобто без жодного публічного обговорення, без того, щоб послухати самих журналістів, саму громадськість, з голосу фактично це питання вирішується в один день.
Вже зараз зрозуміло, що це буде окреме бюджетне це міністерство. Який це бюджет? Що вони утворюють? Але головне не інше, що ми зараз створюємо функціонал, який не зрозуміло кому потім попаде в руки. Якщо завтра нас звільнять одну людину, поставлять іншу людину. Якщо ця людина не буде тою людиною, яка буде відстоювати інтереси країни, то як ми будемо створити? Ми зараз даємо в руки комусь цей скальпель. А завтра цей скальпель опиниться в інших руках. Це неправильно. З іншого боку, мені здається, що ті люди, які були авторами цієї ініціативи, мають зрозуміти, що після 3 років Януковича всі журналісти, вся медіаспільнота дуже чутливо ставиться до будь-якого втручання в медіасферу. І зараз створювати за добу, навіть менше, міністерство ціле, яке називається Міністерство інформаційної політики, не порадившись з журналістами і спільноти, мені здається, це просто не просто ризиковано. Це часів Януковича так, знаєте, голосували нахрапом голоси закону 16 січня. Так не можна робити.
All right, thanks for coming back. Now we're being joined by
Volodymyr Yermolenko,
I'm sorry, I'm sitting
our
on the queue again
all-time
confused.
guest.
Of Internews with our special introductory segment, who's going to give us, in our Media Monitor segment, the rundown of what's been going on this week in the media.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now, I'd like to begin with the stories about Ukraine, and there is a very interesting article in Financial Times, basically an editorial in Financial Times, calling the Western countries to pledge more funds to Ukrainian economy, which is on the brink of a certain default, and there is a call to provide 15 billion more US dollars to help the Ukrainian economy. And it's interesting how we discuss it, because there are opinions that the Western countries are already helping too much, but at the same time we should understand that the future of Ukraine, the future of stability of Ukraine is critical now to the European security. Another interesting article in Le Monde about the new government and the interesting analysis of the three foreigners in the new government, which will head the ministries of finance, of economy, and of health. Then there is also an important thing which I would like to draw your attention to, is the issue of Crimean Tatars. There is an article in Washington Post drawing attention to the deteriorating situation of human rights with Crimean Tatars in the annexed Crimea. There are kidnapping of people. There is the concept of banned literature. And the story in Washington Post provides the analysis, the story of a person who faced this challenge, who faced these allegations of reading and having the banned literature. Now, another interesting debate is going on in some of the Western media. There are two articles, one on, again in Financial Times, and another in BBC, which have an impression to be kind of arguments, the pro-Russian arguments. And the article on BBC, which we quote here, is basically providing many arguments which are, it seems to be the Russian arguments, not even the pro-Russian arguments, but the Russian arguments. So the argument is that the association agreement between EU and Ukraine did not provide room for free trade area between Ukraine and Russia on the one hand and Ukraine and Europe on the other hand, which is false, which is not the case. The argument is that, the Russian language is kind of oppressed in Ukraine, which is again false. A few arguments also which are coming mostly probably from Russian sources, and this is a worrying trend in some of the Western media.
Volodya, and this, when you speak about these arguments, how they are explained? Are they put as a facts?
Well, yes. For example, there is an argument that that the Western countries should have provided the possibility for Ukraine to have free trade areas with Russia and with the European Union at the same time. But this is exactly what was provided by the association agreement. But this is again the Russian argument that the association agreement contradicted the free trade area with Russia and with the community of independent states. Now, there are two articles in German media covering and discussing the Putin speech, the latest Putin's address to Federal Assembly, and it's quite an interesting analysis. Both are made by Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and they're giving us an idea of Putin's major argument, which is provided now about the annexation of Crimea, which is basically the religious argument, saying that Russia had to annex Crimea because of the sacred reasons, because of the religious reasons, because of Prince Vladimir, which is a Kyiv prince actually, was baptized in Crimea. So it's a kind of a theolization, and
well, it was quite slammed by historians, because Crimea as a part of Russia, it's more recent. It's certainly, you can make more historical links to Kyiv with Kievan Rus and all of that than you can to
exactly. But interesting, for example, when Putin was talking about the annexation of Crimea on the day of annexation, he was providing mostly the security argument, saying, well, we annexed Crimea because we don't want NATO to be in Crimea. Now this argument is religious, saying, well, there is this...
What's this idea of gathering the Russian lands, almost?
Yeah, well, and it's ridiculous, because, you cannot annex another territory just by saying, but that there was a prince 1,000 years ago who was baptized in it,
But what was the general response to his speech? It seemed like a lot of it was critical from Western media.
Well, it was critical, so many media are saying that Putin was not as self-convincing, not as convincing, not as energetic, which I personally did note. I think that
he did have
Putin
a cough, though.
Huh?
He did have a cough.
Yeah, well, Putin was, I think he was typically okay for this was his typical style. But the interesting thing is that basically how it already sounds like, you know, a sacred, something sacred which is behind Russian politics. It seems that religion is more important now as an argument than politics. And then the final issue I would like to end with the final issue is a very interesting article published by Mikhail Epstein, a Russian and American and British intellectual, which is called Atsavka k Babku, from Sovok to Bobok, who is analyzing, who is trying to understand the psychology of Russian current politics, starting from Dostoevsky, and showing that basically he launched this concept of mirazlobia and panphobia, meaning that the Russian, already in the Russian political psychology is now a kind of a hatred against the world itself, not against particular civilizations even, but against the world itself, and analyzing these destructive traits of Russian political psychology. That's it.
So thanks a lot. There were pretty a variety of issues this week, and let's follow what the foreign media are writing, analyzed by Volodymyr Yarmolenko from Internews, and who is how you say it in English, a professor of political thought.
I think it was political thinking. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Volodya, for joining us. And another country close to Ukraine, Moldova, became an issue for a battleground for the geopolitics between the West and Russia, as it often written by the foreign media. There were elections in Moldova, and the pro-European parties got a narrow priority, narrow majority in the Moldovan parliament. It was pretty tough. One of the Russian parties, pro-Russian parties, was not able to participate, so a lot to discuss. And we are joined by Vlad Kulminsky, who is a senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Moldova, a great expert on Moldovan politics, and he is there in Chisinau, and that's we hope to make our program more regional, that everything is connected in this part of the world so far. Oh, we see Vlad. Vlad, thank you so much for joining us from Chisinau, and maybe for people who do not know that much, why this election matters. What will be, there is a lot of still criticism that so far there is a pro-European majority, but it's narrow, and it is not really it was before there, but the reforms are not really coming.
Look, for quite a while now, the Republic of Moldova has been pursuing its European integration agenda, its European integration path. We see this in the Republic of Moldova as a crucial precondition to the survival of the country, that this country needs to have functioning institutions, that it needs to open up economic opportunities for its citizens, and it really needs to get out of this, of its, eternal state of decay. And so this European integration program, a European integration agenda, has been chosen and has been vigorously pursued by the government. This election was very crucial because if pro-European parties had lost these elections, then Moldova, there could be a turnaround in Moldova's foreign policy outlook, and it could have led to quite dire consequences, because a lot of people, especially those who are young, especially those who are dynamic, have come to expect that Moldova will continue its movement towards the European Union. The election has been very difficult, and we don't call it victory because the society is really split right down the middle. And what we're trying to do now, we're trying precisely to avoid becoming a geopolitical battleground between Russia and the European Union. What we're trying to do, we're trying to create a model, we're trying to create a functioning system that would work for the people, while at the same time staying out of this geopolitical vortex.
But at the same time, there were more or less the same political forces, pro-European forces. What was the problem? It's not a major change of the system, that those reforms hasn't happened within the last years. For the years, the more or less current political leadership is in power.
Look, yes, but politics has been very difficult in Moldova because those problems have accumulated over the past, pretty much after the Soviet Union collapsed and Moldova became independent. Back at the time, we didn't make this choice, a clear choice, to move towards the European Union, and it seems like this may have been a mistake. So those problems kept on accumulating. We didn't have a clear development model. We didn't have a clear scenario how to reform our institutions. And because of that, those reforms are very tough. They are very unpopular, but they need to be carried through. And pretty much what we have succeeded in doing, we have succeeded in laying the ground for those reforms. Yes, feedback, of course, has been very mixed. And so those reforms will take time. That is the reason why it was so important for Moldova to have more or less an accord or social contract with its citizens that it is going to move towards the European Union.
But to ask a different question, for people from Ukraine, when they were looking at the election results and they saw the division, between people, some of whom were Russian speakers, some ethnically Ukrainian or Russians and Moldovans, but also a split, people who wanted closer connections to Europe and through the association agreement, and other people who wanted to join the Russian-led trade and possible economic union. I mean, are those divisions in Moldova similar to those in Ukraine? How split is the country at this moment?
Look, those divisions go right through our society. Those divisions are not territorial. We have a couple of regions that are heavily pro-Russian, but the ethnic composition in Moldova is very mixed, and pretty much you have Ukrainians, Moldovans of Ukrainian, of Russian, of Moldovan, Romanian origin living side by side. And the opinion is really divided, and that is the reason why we have tried to handle the situation very carefully. As I said, we have explained to the people, and we have clearly communicated to them that there is no other option for the Republic of Moldova, that there is no other model that can turn this country into a functioning state. We have explained very clearly that the customs union is not really much of an option because we have Ukraine, and we cannot really be, a geopolitical pivotal point in Ukraine's own backyard. So therefore, for us, it is not really an option. So we've tried to pursue a very constructive agenda. And at the same time, we, of course, try to keep our relations with Russia on track, because you know that Russia, of course, is concerned primarily about geopolitics, about security, about the fact that...
Very interesting, unfortunately.
And, no, but the last one from me, that there were also some allegations from these pro-European, activists, whatever you call them, that, Russia wants to do the same things in Moldova to split the country. Do you think it's more allegation?
Look, I mean, we are trying to be very calm. We're trying to be very constructive, again, because we do not want to deepen those divisions in society. We're trying to explain, and we have so far succeeded in doing it, because, earlier last year and earlier this year, we had some movement towards, well, we'd call it, semi-separation in Gagauzia, which is an ethnic region in the south of Moldova. We have handled it very calmly. So we said, ladies and gentlemen, there will be no crackdown whatsoever. The program that the government is pursuing is for all of Moldova. So we're trying not to deepen those divisions within our society. We're trying to emphasize at every single opportunity that this is good for pretty much every single citizen of Moldova. It's for all of them.
Thanks so much. It was Vladislav Kulminsky, who is a senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Moldova, talking to us from Chisinau, from the Moldovan capital. We still have a lot of reaction from our shore, so we putting to your attention this tweet from Paul Neeland. It's about the government, that the reforms in Ukraine is needed right now, is a constant process. That probably would be a lot in our, you would follow also our show afterwards on the
It's
on
ongoing.
the reaction.
We'll be here and we'll be following all of it, yeah. But I mean, to take it into a slightly different direction, because reform is ongoing, but all these other key elements of the Ukrainian crisis are as well. Part of that has been just the fighting in Donetsk, the destabilized situation, and probably not everyone knows that our own correspondent, Natalia Gomanyuk, spent 7 days, or roughly a week, in the east, in Donbass and in Donetsk there. And, people need to understand that that is very rare, especially for Ukrainian journalists. That's quite difficult. Are in danger in the east. People have been held, especially previously in Slavyansk. So having that kind of access, especially for Ukrainians going there, is unique. So we have some footage here we're going to show first of the situation out in the east.
So yeah, that was that we can also follow and watch the all clip, and there would be more reports with English subtitles that you can follow after. And yeah, it's important to say that, yeah, it's true that it's very hard for the Ukrainian journalists to be there, and it has created a huge gap and a huge misunderstanding of the situation on the ground here in Kyiv.
What don't people understand?
I think they don't understand the gravity of the situation. We, for a foreign audience, also should explain that there are roughly 4.5 million people living. It's the most populated area in Ukraine. And for many months, they couldn't receive their salaries, pension, the government employees, and there are a lot of people who depends on the subsidies from the state.
I find that very interesting because many people, in Ukraine, outside of the separatist-controlled areas, want to take a hard line. They agree with cutting them off.
There are some, and this is a huge misunderstanding because, you definitely understand that the separatists, they are not a state, they are not incapable. Wherever you think about them, call them fighters, call them, there are these armed groups. But the winter is coming. There are people who more or less left without the food, without the shelters. I visited a few shelters where people living for 4 or 5 months. And when we talk about the pensioners, they had some savings. And they mainly stopped to receive the money physically in June, August, July, and they already have spent everything which was there, and besides the food, which was, in summer it's easier, you can get the food from your garden, it's almost over. And now without this, it's for many, many people, the winter would be really, really tough. It would be brutal and dramatic.
What were people expecting? Did they have a plan for how to survive, or were they waiting for assistance from different charity groups?
The people do not have a plan. They couldn't expect it would happen. And there is some random support. And important to understand that there are extremely brave, great people in Donetsk, the volunteer groups like Responsible Citizens of Donbass, which took a plea, they've taken a plea that they won't ever support anybody with the arms.
Oh, they've taken an oath not to take a side.
Because that's the way they can operate. And wherever you think we've heard a lot of problems in summer that the separatists won't accept, the trucks from Ukraine with the humanitarian aid. It's not the case for the last months. So there are mainly international organizations who bring some food and maybe medicine, and we also should speak about some special, orphanage houses, psychiatric hospitals. Nothing was really has been evacuated. I mean, orphan houses maybe, but in general, that things wasn't evacuating. So the volunteers, they come to the shelters, bring the very basic ration of food, maybe some special, treatment, but it's not just for wounded. There are a lot of people with chronic disease, and it's a matter of life and death.
Was there heating in homes, or what's the situation with
the
heating
there? Is there. The heating is there. The water is there, and for a lot of people, maybe hard to understand that it's still a vast area, and the life. The people live their life. When you just in center of Donetsk, besides all the separatist billboards, you don't see the big difference. It's still 800,000 people trying to live their life with all the troubles. But I think that what we should follow, what will be the discussion between the Ukrainian government, which should be, for us as a Ukrainian citizen, I'm a Ukrainian citizen, it's an obligation of a Ukrainian citizen, state to, because it's a natural
right. The Ukrainian
state
has to provide.
Yeah,
for them.
to provide, and they explain. I try to have a debate with the people from cabinet for Ukrainian government to explain the situation. The point is, the answer of the Ukrainian government is that the people can move away, and that there is a procedure, complicated procedure to re-register. But in fact, they cannot. That many people cannot leave.
And these systems are already overloaded. I mean, we've had people on that they really, they do a good job, many of them, but they struggle. And it's not just the state, it's private organizations too.
Yeah, and the private organization, but it's too many people in the worldwide. They will not that you can have a heavily populated area can be moved away. So there is an issue the way how this help would be brought to the region, and maybe it would be the speculation that there is a way, even if it would be marked with, I don't know, some kind of thing that it's cash or support from the Ukrainian state, that it should be there, but wherever you think on the separatists, you should do that on their way. But still, it's tough. There are armed people, political...
What surprised you the most? I mean, what didn't you expect, since I know you hadn't been there for a little while?
No, I mean, for me, what is very, very difficult to see how bad is the situation with, especially with the pensioners. For me, it's very hard personally to see that Kyiv is doing really well. I mean, it's still complicated. We talk a lot about the crisis, but it's uncomparable. There are very basic things. People won't put some, like they would stop their fridge because it's too much. It's cold. You can put the food outside because the fridge uses too much energy. And these small details are striking. Of course, you can see, for me, of course, you see the, armed people everywhere. They're in the buses somewhere, and, you should keep an eye on that. And of course, it's what is really to understand that there is this absolute split between the armed groups and people who running these separate republics and the general population. Because, I mean, these guys, when you go to the expensive hotel where the foreign journalists stay and the foreign organizations are based, like everybody would have it's normal, like an expensive meal, also the armed guys, and so this blockade, wherever you call it, it doesn't matter at all for the separatists themselves.
Well, fascinating. It's great to have these reports from people who are going there.
We will watch more, and not just this. I think all our reports after the show, and thanks a lot for being with us. Follow Hromadske. А что вы сегодня готовите?
Что смогли сделать? Селедочку.
Селедочка сегодня.
Селедочку, вот картошечка. Пюре.
Пюре, да.
Горячей водой.
А вы сколько здесь уже?
С июля месяца. Стали бомбить, так мы сюда.
А у вас там в квартире что?
У нас, слава богу, пока еще нет. Но все время, мы вот эти дома, вот рядышком, вот буквально вот вышел, и вот эти дома. Июль, август, сентябрь, октябрь, ноябрь. 5 месяцев.
А где дети?
Моя мама боится. Мы боимся быть дома, потому что очень страшно. Боимся, потому что, в общем, сами понимаете, почему. Мы приходим домой, и ужас просто. В квартире без конца. Вот это летают туда-сюда, что пенсии не дают. Ну что мы живем? Не знаю. Выживаем как-то. Какие-то были раньше сбережения, которые уже проедены. И вот теперь ждем кто чего. Гуманитарную помощь. Что откладывали, знаете, на похороны, еще на какие-то непредвиденные. Все это уже проедено. И вот моя кровать тоже гуманитарка. Вот эти гуманитарка. чайники, гуманитарка. Потихонечку нам подвозят. Мы тут скоро будем, все нам сюда привезут. Еще матрасы нам привезите и все уже.
И потом будут выгонять.
А мы будем идти.
Сегодня, сейчас кто на работе, кто что. Тут из Украинска есть беженцы, из села беженцы. Вот здесь 13 человек, порой 15.
А что с вашим домом?
Разбито. Убежали, в чем стояли летом.
Это уже сколько месяцев здесь?
16 или 18 июля. И вот это, тут ДНР нам дали одеяло.
Для отопления. Вот этим сушим понемногу хоть около тряпки.
Дети сейчас поехали в центр города, там не бомбят. Вот тут учатся, вот тут...
Учатся вот здесь, да?
Да, вот учебнички. Тут.
Это мать?
Да. Благодарствую.
Вы там проверяйте сразу, да?
Проверьте, пожалуйста.
Так, водичка.
Я. Прекрасно привезли.
Хорошо.
А что у вас с вашими домами, с вашим домом?
А с моим домом крышу снесло полностью. И вот на квартире дырки, 2 снаряд упал, пробил, небо видно.
А вот это
И крышу полностью снесло на доме.
Ви скільки здесь уже?
Із июля місяця.
А звідки?
Із посілка, туди аж Запєсків, туди як на Красноармійській. У мене коло квартири міна впала, висаджувала все. Мене оце сюди привезли. Це з іюля без пенсії, без жилья, без нічого. У нас там і пошти немає, і Авдіївка ж під українськими. Ясіновата теж під ними. Нема ж, нікому ж не виплачують. Не везуть же, нам з Авдіївки привозять пенсію, там наша, а нема ж, не возять. Мене син тут оформляє як біженця. І тут хочу, щоб тут деньги получати.
Скажіть, так це ви скільки вже грошей не бачили?
З іюля місяця. То як отримала була перед іюлем, трошки берегла і це так бережу. Сьогодні в аптеку ходила, купила для глаз. Не для глаз, от повішено. І от так потрошку. Ну, а тут оце ту гуманітарку дають, то син у мене ще один робить на заводі, на хлібозаводі, там ото в общежитті невістка піде приготовить, то супчик, то борщик, то сюди приносять і тут ми оце їмо. Що в іюлі, що в чому прийшла, юбка, кофта, правда, халатик ще був байковий накинутий і все. Ну тут тоді вже там осінню курточку дали мені така тоненька. Правда, невістка сапожки купила, бо я ж у тапках оце як стою, так вже як приїхала. Син, правда, купив гамаші і колготки купив. Бо не було в чому.
А в сина нема де жити?
Він тут, у убіжищі.
А так само живе тут з вами?
Так, тільки жінка на роботу ходить утром, а він тут днем, як не бахкає, підуть їсти, приготовлять і сюди приходять. У їх маленька квартирка отут над дорогою проти іздательства. Там одна комнатушечка, отак балкон і двері напроти. Ми вже там були, так там усе
гувкає.
Да. У його там у общежитті є квартирка, комнатка. Так ми там усі оце нас 11 душ, і ото поки не дуже бахкало, ми ото там в общежитті в його квартирки, у комнатки були.
Спасибо, что приезжаете. Проведайте хоть немножко.
This
все такое покоцанное.
Я хочу хороше. Я хочу, щоб цього не було. Хай я получатиму, оце що й получаю, мені не треба надбавки. Хай одна Україна буде, хай там все здесь буде. Ну тільки щоб одна Україна була.
Когда началась Вторая мировая война? Что?
Нам в хату Путін запустив єнотів. Хата не обладнана під життя єнотів. Та то не наші єноти!
Це просто треш. І якщо завтра цей ідіот введе війська, ніяке НАТО за нас воювати не буде.
Но это никакая нахрен не гражданская война. Забудьте об этом.
Я готовий з вами тут стати і казати: Росія, забирайтеся з України. Путін хуйло.
Молодець.
Спеціально для громадського телебачення я заліз на найвищу будівлю іншого боку Майдану Незалежності, щоб показати вам, як найбільше скільки людей зібралося на Майдані Незалежності.
За ці тижні страх вже повністю кудись йшов. І я думаю, тут тисячі таких. Дякуємо громадському. Громадському дякуємо.
Вам дякую. Від імені громадського.
Вам дякую.
Громадське потребує твоєї підтримки. Ми належимо громадянам України і є некомерційним проектом. Підтримати проект можна, перерахувавши гроші через PayPal, Privat24 або Money.ua. Громадське існує за рахунок саме твоєї підтримки.
Добрий вечір, любі друзі. Дуже дякую тим, хто з нами залишився. Це найстійкіші наші глядачі, я так розумію, тому що 21:30, громадське головне, підбиваємо підсумки неділі. Ну, скажемо відверто, що, в принципі, день не видався таким рясним на події, але маємо те, що маємо, як сказав перший президент України. Отже, традиційно завершуємо, вірніше, починаємо підсумок дня з ситуації в зоні проведення антитерористичної операції, з тою інформацією, яку надає люб'язно інформаційно-аналітичний центр Ради національної безпеки та прес-центр антитерористичної операції. Леонід Матюхін, вечірній дайджест. Давайте подивимося.
У порівнянні з минулою добою активність бойовиків на цій протяжності лінії фронту знизилась. Загалом вони спромоглись на 33 спроби атак на укріплені позиції наших військ. Артилерія та міномети бандитів найбільш часто проявили себе на Дебальцівському плацдармі. Терористи обстріляли населені пункти Міос, Чернухіно, Дебальцево, Орлова-Іванівка, Шахта Полтавська, Нікішино, Ольховатка, Фащівка. У відповідь на агресивні дії терористів артилерія сил АТО нанесла 42 вогневих ударів по місцям скупчення живої сили та техніки бойовиків. Тривають роботи з побудови фортифікаційних укріплень сил АТО. Бійці підрозділів займаються вдосконаленням інфраструктури польових таборів та виконанням бойової роботи.
Також сьогодні бойовики обстріляли селище Ленінське, що на Донеччині. Загинула, на жаль, одна жінка, ще одна поранена. Про це повідомляє Головне управління, Міністерства внутрішніх справ у Донецькій області. Наступне говорять, у Дзержинський міський відділ міліції надійшло повідомлення про загибель та поранення місцевих мешканок, які постраждали внаслідок артобстрілу терористами селища міського типу Ленінське. Від осколкових поранень